Okay. So Todd? Yeah.
I just realized I forgot to take the tape off. So it hasn't been.
Oh, go do it.